Kong Min-ju is a man of violence, vengeance, and absolute dominance. An alpha who claims no one and trusts no soul in Seoul's blood-soaked underworld. His penthouse office sits like a throne room within a fortress, protected by retinal scanners, pheromone detection systems, and armed security stationed at every entrance. This established security makes the sudden appearance of a baby in a bunny-eared onesie on his imported Italian marble floor at 2 in the morning an impossible and jarring inciting incident. The child shouldn't exist in this space. Nothing soft, innocent, or unvetted has ever breached Min-ju's inner sanctum. Yet here the infant sits, giggling, fearless, reaching chubby hands toward the most dangerous alpha in Seoul with complete trust. The moment their eyes meet, something cracks in Min-ju's carefully constructed armor. His instincts roar with a single, primal command he hasn't felt in 15 years: protect. The baby's appearance is more than a security breach. It's the beginning of an unraveling, one that will bring a terrified Omega father crashing through those same doors, begging for mercy Min-ju has never shown. One that will force the untouchable Mafia boss to choose between the empire he built on isolation and the family he never knew he was desperately, achingly alone without. Before I tell you what happens next, subscribe to Starry-Eyed Lovers and tell me where you're watching from. The scent hit him first. Kong Min-ju's hand froze halfway to his whiskey glass, every alpha instinct in his body suddenly screaming alert. Not danger, something else. Something that didn't belong in his sterile, climate-controlled penthouse office where the air smelled only of leather, expensive cologne, and the faint metallic tang of the gun in his desk drawer. This was sweet, milky, pure. His eyes snapped to the source before his mind could process the impossibility. A baby sat on his imported Italian marble floor, barely 10 feet from his desk. 8 months old, maybe 9. Chubby legs folded beneath a body still unsteady with new mobility. The infant wore a white onesie with ridiculous bunny ears sewn onto the hood, and was currently examining its own toes with the solemn concentration of a scientist studying a new discovery. Min-ju didn't move. Couldn't move. His brain stuttered through a dozen explanations and discarded them all. The retinal scanner. The pheromone detectors calibrated to shriek at any unknown biological signature. The 3 armed guards stationed between the elevator and this room. The baby looked up. Their eyes met, and Min-ju felt something crack in his chest. A hairline fracture in armor he'd spent 15 years welding into place. The child smiled. Not the calculating smirk Min-ju saw in boardrooms and back alleys, but pure, uncomplicated joy. As if the most dangerous alpha in Seoul was the best thing this tiny human had ever seen. How did you get in here? The question came out rougher than intended, his voice unused to gentleness. The baby babbled something incomprehensible and reached out both hands, making grabbing motions in the universal language of infants who wanted to be picked up. Min-ju's alpha biology moved before his brain gave permission. He was around the desk, crouching on the cold marble, close enough to catch that scent again, stronger now, drowning his senses. Milk and honey, and something indefinably safe that made his canines ache with the urge to protect. "You shouldn't be here," he said, softer now. "This is the most dangerous room in Seoul." The baby giggled and lunged forward, tiny hands closing around Min-ju's tie with surprising strength. He caught the child automatically, muscle memory from a lifetime ago, before blood and betrayal became his native language. The weight settled against his chest, warm and trusting, and Min-ju realized he was smiling. Actually smiling. Not the cold slash he used to intimidate subordinates or the predatory curve he wore during negotiations. This was real. Genuine. The expression felt foreign on his face, muscles moving in patterns they'd forgotten. "Who do you belong to?" He adjusted his hold, supporting the baby's head with practiced ease that shocked him. When had he last held something this fragile? This innocent? And how the hell did you breach 5 million won worth of security? The baby cooed and patted his cheek with one chubby hand, leaving a smear of drool on his jaw. Min-ju should have been disgusted. Should have called security immediately. Should have been furious that his fortress had been violated by something that couldn't even walk properly. Instead, he found himself swaying slightly, the rocking motion instinctive and unbidden. The baby's head drooped against his shoulder, exhausted from the adventure. That scent wrapped around Min-ju like a blanket, burrowing into places he'd locked down decades ago. "You're tired," he murmured, voice dropping to a register he didn't recognize. "Crawling is hard work, isn't it?" The baby sighed, a tiny, contented sound that punched through Min-ju's ribs like a bullet. He'd killed men for less than this. For interrupting his work, for entering his space uninvited, for making him feel things he'd sworn never to feel again. His reputation was built on absolute control, zero tolerance for weakness, and the cold certainty that attachment was just another word for leverage. But this child looked at him with eyes that held no fear, no calculation, no awareness that the arms holding him belonged to a monster. Just trust. Complete, terrifying trust. I should put you down, Minju said to the dozing infant. Call security. Find whoever's responsible for this catastrophic failure and make an example that ensures it never happens again. The baby's fingers curled into his shirt. Minju's chest constricted. The smile hadn't left his face. The alarms erupted in a shrieking cascade of sound. Motion sensors, pheromone detectors, breach protocols all triggered at once. Red emergency lights strobed across the walls, and Minju heard the thunder of boots as his security team converged on his location. He looked down at the baby in his arms, now awake and starting to whimper at the noise. Without thinking, he pressed the small body closer, one hand cupping the back of the child's head, his body instinctively curving to shield the infant from the chaos. The door burst open. 6 men in tactical gear flooded in, weapons drawn, searching for the threat that had triggered every alarm in the building. They found their boss standing in the center of his office, bathed in emergency lighting, cradling a baby in a bunny-eared onesie like it was made of spun glass. No one spoke. No one moved. Minju met his head of security's shocked stare with a calm he didn't feel. Shut off the alarms. Now. His voice carried the weight of command that had built an empire. But his hands, still gentle around the trembling child, told an entirely different story. The alarms died mid-shriek, leaving a ringing silence that felt more dangerous than the noise. Minju's security team stood frozen, weapons still raised, staring at their boss like they'd walked into an alternate dimension where the laws of physics no longer applied. Then another body crashed through the doorway. Jihun, please don't hurt him. The Omega barely made it 3 steps before collapsing to his knees, chest heaving with exhaustion. His cleaning uniform hung loose on a too-thin frame, the cheap fabric torn at one shoulder. Dark hair fell into wild eyes that darted between the armed men, and Minju with the cornered desperation of prey that knew it was already dead. But his hands stretched forward, reaching for the baby with a parent's single-minded focus that transcended self-preservation. Please, the Omega gasped. He's just a baby. He doesn't understand. I'll take whatever punishment you want, just don't hurt my son. The scent hit Minju like a physical blow. Fear, sharp and acrid, flooded the room. But underneath, exhaustion so profound it made his own bones ache, desperation that tasted like rust, and something else. Something that made every alpha instinct in his body roar to life with an intensity that nearly dropped him to his knees. Omega. Unmated. Unprotected. His canines lengthened before he could stop them. His vision sharpened, picking out details with predatory precision. The bruises on the Omega's wrists, weeks old and fading yellow. The tremble in his shoulders that spoke of skipped meals and black market suppressants. The way he held himself, ready to fight, to die, to do whatever it took to protect that baby. Sir? His head of security's voice cracked through the tension. Should we? Get out. Minju's command came out rougher than intended, his alpha voice bleeding through the edges. All of you. Now. But sir, the breach. I said get out. They went. Even battle-hardened men knew better than to argue when their boss's eyes flashed gold, and his scent turned territorial enough to make the air thick. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Minju alone with the trembling Omega and the baby who'd somehow crawled through 5,000,001 of security to find him. Stand up, Minju said, voice carefully controlled now. He could feel his alpha biology screaming at him. Protect, claim, defend, and shoved it down with the discipline of 15 years' practice. I'm not going to hurt you. The Omega didn't move, just stared at him with those huge, terrified eyes. Up close, Minju could see he was young. Mid-20s maybe, with delicate features and a mouth made for smiling that currently trembled with barely suppressed panic. Beautiful, his hindbrain supplied unhelpfully. Omega. Ours. I'm Lee Min-suk, the Omega whispered, as if giving his name might humanize him enough to deserve mercy. I worked, night cleaning crew on the 42nd floor. I didn't know Jihun could crawl that far. I only turned my back for a minute, I swear. I never meant. Jihun. Minju looked down at the baby, who'd stopped whimpering and was now watching the drama with wide eyes. That's his name. Yes. Min-suk's voice broke on the word. Please. He's all I have. If you're going to kill someone, kill me. Just let someone take him. Anyone. He deserves. Stop. The command came out sharper than intended. Minju forced himself to gentle his tone, aware of how his alpha presence must be crushing this terrified Omega. I already told you. I'm not going to hurt you. Or him. Min-suk blinked. You're not. No. But he violated your security. Everyone knows Kong Minju doesn't tolerate. Everyone knows a lot of things, Minju interrupted. He shifted his hold on Jehun, who chose that moment to reach for Min-suk with a whimper, tiny hands opening and closing. Most of them true. But I don't make war on children and terrified Omegas. Despite what my reputation suggests, I'm not completely without humanity. The lie tasted bitter. Until 20 minutes ago, he would have sworn he'd carved out every scrap of softness and fed it to Seoul's underworld. But here he stood, cradling a baby who shouldn't exist and resisting the overwhelming urge to pull this broken Omega into his arms and promise no one would ever make him kneel again. Here. He crouched down, bringing himself to Min-suk's level. Eye to eye. Equal. Even though the power dynamic between Alpha Mafia boss and terrified Omega cleaner couldn't be more skewed. Take your son. Min-suk's hands shook as he reached out, but the moment Jehun landed in his arms, everything changed. His spine straightened. His scent shifted from pure terror to something fierce and protective. He tucked the baby against his chest and met Minju's gaze directly for the first time. Thank you, he said quietly. I know that means nothing coming from someone like me, but thank you. Someone like me. As if being Omega made him less. As if working night shifts to keep his child fed was shameful instead of admirable. Minju felt his jaw clench. How long have you been working here? 3 months. Min-suk kissed Jehun's forehead, checking him over with the meticulous care of a parent who'd learned to fear everything. I take the night shifts because they pay more and I can bring Jehun. He usually sleeps in the break room while I work. I don't know how he got out. I locked the door, I swear I did, but he's been trying to crawl in. Stop apologizing. Minju stood, putting distance between them before his alpha biology did something stupid like scent mark this Omega, who already smelled like exhaustion and desperation. You work minimum wage cleaning other people's messes at 2 a.m. while taking care of an infant. That's not something that requires an apology. Min-suk stared at him like he'd started speaking a foreign language. I don't understand. You will. Minju moved behind his desk, kneading the barrier between them. His office suddenly felt too small, the air too thick with pheromones that made his control feel paper-thin. Where's Jehun's other parent? The Omega's face shuddered immediately. Gone. Gone how? Does it matter? Min-suk's voice gained an edge of steel beneath the fear. He doesn't want us. Made that clear when I told him I was pregnant. Alpha. The word hung unspoken between them. An alpha who'd gotten an Omega pregnant and abandoned them both. Minju felt a growl build in his chest and swallowed it. You're unmated, he observed, keeping his tone neutral despite the way his instincts raged at the confirmation. Suppressants are cheaper than a bond. Min-suk stood slowly. Jehun clutched against his chest like a shield. Are we free to go? I'll clear out my things, Anne. Sit down. What? Sit down, Minju repeated, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. We need to talk. Min-suk's fear scent spiked again. About what? About how your infant son bypassed military-grade security and found his way into my office. Minju leaned back in his chair, watching the Omega with the same careful attention he gave to business rivals. And about why I'm more curious than angry about that fact. Before I tell you what happens next, subscribe to Starry-Eyed Lovers and tell me where you're watching from. Min-suk perched on the edge of the leather chair like a bird ready to bolt. Jehun still clutched against his chest. The baby had other ideas. He squirmed, making grabbing motions toward Minju with increasing insistence, babbling something that sounded like a demand. He likes you, Min-suk said quietly, surprise evident in his voice. He doesn't usually. Most alphas scare him. I'm not most alphas. Minju kept his voice low, non-threatening, even as his biology screamed at the Omega's continued fear scent. Let him come here if he wants. Min-suk hesitated, then slowly lowered Jehun to the floor. The baby immediately began his determined crawl toward Minju's desk, moving with the single-minded focus of someone on a mission. He reached the massive mahogany structure and pulled himself up using the edge, tiny legs wobbling with effort. Minju found himself leaning forward, one hand extending automatically to steady the child. Jehun latched onto his finger with both hands, using it as leverage to remain standing. His grip was surprisingly strong, warm and sticky and completely trusting. Clever, Minju murmured. That's how you got past the pheromone sensors, isn't it? You're too young to register as a threat. The system ignored you. I'm so sorry, Min-suk whispered, tears finally spilling over. I never meant, the break room door, I locked it, but the latch must be broken, and he's been getting faster, and I should have noticed, should have been more careful. Stop. Min-ju kept his eyes on Jehun, who was now attempting to chew on his finger. Tell me about your situation. All of it. And don't leave anything out because you think it'll make you look bad. Min-suk's breath hitched. I work the night shift, midnight to 6 a.m. Premium Services Cleaning Company. We do the executive floors when everyone's gone home. It pays triple minimum wage because no one wants those hours. And you bring a baby to work. I have to. The words came out defensive, fierce. Daycare costs more than I make in a week. My family, they disowned me when I had Jehun. Said I shamed them by getting pregnant outside a bond. The father wanted nothing to do with us. So it's just me. Just us. Jehun chose that moment to look up at Min-ju with those huge eyes and babble. Appa. The world stopped. Min-ju's chest constricted so violently he forgot how to breathe. The single syllable hit him like a bullet, clean through the ribs, straight into whatever remained of his heart. His finger was still trapped in Jehun's grip, and the baby was smiling at him like Min-ju had hung the moon and stars specifically for his entertainment. Appa, Jehun repeated, pleased with himself. Appa, Appa. He doesn't, Min-suk's voice cracked. He's just learning words. He doesn't mean. I know what he means. Min-ju's voice came out rougher than intended. He carefully extracted his finger and scooped Jehun up, settling the baby against his chest before he could think better of it. The weight felt right. Terrifyingly right. He's asking for a father. He has a father. Me. Min-suk wiped at his eyes angrily. I'm both. I have to be. Min-ju studied the omega across his desk. This young man who'd lost everything and still fought to give his son a life. The cleaning uniform, the shadows under his eyes, the way his scent still carried notes of suppressants that were slowly poisoning him. This wasn't just survival. This was a war Min-suk was fighting alone, with no armor and no allies. How much debt? Min-ju asked quietly. Min-suk's head snapped up. What? You're using black market suppressants. I can smell them in your system. Those aren't cheap, and they're not something anyone takes unless they're desperate. He adjusted Jehun, who discovered his tie and was attempting to strangle him with it. So, how much debt? That's not, you don't need to. How much? The command in his voice made Min-suk flinch, but he answered. 53 million won. The suppressants, hospital bills when Jehun was born, back rent, formula, diapers. It adds up. 53 million won. About 40,000 US dollars. An impossible amount for someone making minimum wage, even with triple pay. Min-ju spent more than that on suits. And the father? He pays nothing. He said Jehun wasn't his responsibility. Min-suk's voice went flat dead. Said I should have been on better suppressants if I didn't want to get pregnant. Offered me money for an abortion and walked away when I refused. Min-ju felt his canines lengthen. The alpha in him, the part he usually kept muzzled and controlled, wanted to hunt down this worthless excuse for a packmate and teach him exactly what happened to alphas who abandoned their omegas and children. Sir? His head of security's voice came through the intercom. We've reviewed the security footage. The infant entered through the maintenance shaft. Crawled approximately 40 meters from the break room on floor 42. The breach wasn't detected because his biological signature registered as negligible. Find out why the break room door was unlocked, Min-ju ordered. And get building maintenance up here. I want a full inspection of every lock on floor 42. Yes, sir. Should we terminate the cleaning company's contract? Min-ju looked at Min-suk, who'd gone pale. No, but I want a detailed background check on every employee with access to the executive floors. By morning. Background checks. Min-suk's voice climbed with panic. That means they'll fire me. The contract specifies no criminal records, no debt above a certain threshold, no. They won't fire you, Min-ju interrupted calmly. Jehun had abandoned the tie and was now trying to put Min-ju's entire thumb in his mouth. Because you're not going to be working for them anymore. The color drained completely from Min-suk's face. Please. I need this job. I know I messed up, but I can't lose. You're not losing anything. Min-ju met his eyes across the desk, watching understanding fail to dawn. I'm offering you a new position. Min-suk stared at him. Hey, what? You need money. I need. Min-ju paused, the truth catching in his throat. What did he need? An hour ago, he would have said nothing. Now, with Jehun's weight warm against his chest and those trusting eyes looking at him like he was something other than a monster, he wasn't so sure. I need someone I can trust in my household. You don't know me. No, Minju agreed. But I know desperation when I see it. And I know you'd die for this child. That kind of loyalty is rare. His lieutenants were going to think he'd lost his mind. Hell, he was starting to think he'd lost his mind. But Jehun was making soft cooing sounds against his shoulder, and Min Suk was looking at him with something that might become hope if he didn't crush it, and Min Ju realized with sudden, terrifying clarity that he was already in too deep to back out. What kind of position? Min Suk asked carefully. We'll discuss details. But it comes with housing, healthcare, and enough salary to clear your debt within the year. Min Ju kept his voice businesslike, even as Jehun grabbed a fistful of his hair. Plus protection. Protection from what? From whoever needs to learn that you and your son are under my authority now. Min Ju's eyes flashed gold. And anyone who touches what's mine learns that lesson exactly once. The background check arrived at dawn, delivered by Min Ju's most trusted investigator with a kind of grim expression that promised nothing good inside. Min Ju dismissed him with a wave and opened the file alone in his office. The same space where 12 hours ago a baby had crawled across his floor and cracked something fundamental in his chest. He'd sent Min Suk and Jehun home in his private car with instructions to rest and return that evening to discuss terms. The Omega had looked at him like he expected a trap, but exhaustion had won over suspicion. Min Ju had watched them leave and immediately called in every favor he had to get answers. Now those answers sat in front of him, and he wished he'd left some stones unturned. Lee Min Suk, 24 years old, only child of a mid-level corporate family in Busan. Presented as Omega at 17, late enough that his parents had hoped he might be Beta. That hope had died along with their affection, apparently. The first few pages were standard. Good grades, scholarship to a decent university, degree in early childhood education. Dreams of teaching. A future that looked bright and uncomplicated. Then the name that made Min Ju's grip tighten on the papers. Choi Tae-hyun. Alpha, 32. Heir to a pharmaceutical fortune. And according to the investigation, a predator who'd targeted Min Suk during his last year of university with the methodical precision of someone who'd done it before. Min Ju's investigator had been thorough. There were hospital records from 3 different emergency room visits. A fractured wrist explained away as a fall. Bruised ribs from walking into a door. A concussion with no explanation at all except the attending doctor's note. Patient reluctant to discuss injury origin. Suspected domestic situation. Each report was dated before Min Suk's pregnancy. Before he had any legal protection under PAC law that might have made Choi think twice about using him as a punching bag. Fuck, Min Ju breathed, his alpha biology screaming for blood. The pregnancy had been the escape attempt. Min Suk had tried to use the traditional bond laws. An alpha who got an omega pregnant was legally required to either mate or provide financial support. It should have been his ticket out, his leverage for protection. Instead, Choi had hired lawyers. Expensive ones. They'd argued the pregnancy was planned entrapment. That Min Suk had deliberately stopped taking suppressants to trap a wealthy alpha. That he was a gold digger, a fraud, a manipulative omega using biology as a weapon. The courts had sided with Choi. No bond, no support, no protection. Min Suk's family had disowned him 2 weeks later. The report included a copy of the formal letter, written in his father's hand. You have shamed our family name. Do not contact us again. You are no longer our son. Min Ju set down the papers and pressed his palms against his eyes. The migraine building behind them had nothing to do with lack of sleep, and everything to do with the rage pulsing through his veins. There was more. Min Suk had dropped out of university in his 3rd trimester. Lost his scholarship, his housing, his entire support system in one fell swoop. He'd worked delivery jobs until he was too pregnant to pass for Beta. Then nothing for 3 months. The investigator had found a gap in the employment records that suggested homelessness or worse. Jehun had been born in a public hospital. Emergency C-section. Min Suk had nearly died from complications. No one had been listed as next of kin. No one had visited during his week-long recovery. Just a 23-year-old Omega alone with a newborn and medical debt that would take a decade to clear. The suppressants had started 4 months postpartum. Black market garbage that suppressed heats but wreaked havoc on omega biology long-term. Min Suk was slowly poisoning himself to avoid the vulnerability of a heat cycle while working night shifts with a baby strapped to his back. Min Ju reached the last page and found surveillance photos from the past 3 months. Min-suk leaving the building at dawn with Jehun bundled against his chest. Min-suk buying formula at a convenience store, counting coins to make sure he had enough. Min-suk sitting alone on a park bench during his break, feeding Jehun while tears streamed silently down his face. The last photo showed them sleeping. Min-suk curled around his son in what looked like a closet-sized room, both of them on a mat on the floor because they couldn't afford a bed. Min-ju closed the file and stared at his hands. They were steady, controlled, showing none of the fury that made his vision pulse red at the edges. He'd built an empire on control, on the ability to compartmentalize violence and keep it separate from strategy. But this was different. He recognized the hollow loneliness in those photos, the kind that came from being discarded by everyone who was supposed to protect you. Min-ju's own parents had been cruel in different ways. His father's fists, his Omega mother's broken bond that killed her slowly from the inside out. He'd learned early that attachment was lethal, that love was just leverage waiting to be used against you. He'd sworn never to be vulnerable like that again. Never to need anyone or anything enough that losing it could destroy him. Yet here he sat, looking at photos of an Omega who'd lost everything and kept fighting anyway. Who'd been beaten down and abandoned and betrayed, but still got up every morning to feed his son. Who'd crawled through hell with a baby on his back and somehow hadn't let it break him. Min-ju's intercom buzzed. "Sir? Lee Min-suk is here for his appointment. Should I send him up?" He glanced at the clock. 7 p.m. The Omega was punctual despite probably not sleeping more than a few hours. "Give me 5 minutes," Min-ju said. He locked the file in his desk drawer and stood, moving to the window that overlooked Seoul's glittering skyline. His city. His empire. Built on the corpses of everyone who'd underestimated him. He'd told Min-suk he recognized desperation. What he hadn't said was that he recognized the peculiar loneliness of people who'd learned they couldn't trust anyone. Who'd been betrayed by blood and pack, and every system that was supposed to keep them safe. Min-ju saw it because he lived it. Had lived it for 15 years, building walls so high and thick that nothing could touch him. Until a baby crawled through them like they were made of paper. "Send him up," Min-ju said into the intercom. "And cancel my appointments for the rest of the night. I don't want to be disturbed." He had an offer to make. One that would sound insane to his lieutenants and probably terrify Min-suk. But Min-ju hadn't built an empire by playing it safe. And something told him that this terrified Omega with his fearless baby might be the most dangerous gamble he'd ever taken. Min-suk entered the office carrying Jehun against his hip, and Min-ju caught himself tracking their movement with an intensity that bordered on possessive. The Omega looked better than he had 12 hours ago, showered, wearing clean clothes that still hung loose on his frame, dark circles under his eyes slightly less pronounced. But the wariness remained, etched into the way he held himself at a careful distance. "Sit," Min-ju said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please." Min-suk obeyed, settling Jehun on his lap. The baby immediately tried to launch himself toward Min-ju, making grabbing motions and babbling appa with increasing volume. "Jehun, no," Min-suk whispered, embarrassment flooding his scent. "I'm sorry, he's been saying that all day. I've tried to correct him, but let him come here." Min-ju kept his voice neutral, even as his alpha biology sang with satisfaction at the child's recognition. "We need to talk, and he'll just fuss if we don't." Min-suk hesitated, then lowered Jehun to the floor. The baby crawled across the space with determined speed, pulling himself up using Min-ju's leg and reaching up with both arms. Min-ju lifted him automatically, settling the warm weight against his chest with the ease of someone who'd done it a dozen times instead of twice. "You said you had an offer," Min-suk said quietly, watching his son with an expression Min-ju couldn't quite read. "A position." "Yes." Min-ju pulled a folder from his desk drawer, not the background check, but the contract his lawyers had drawn up in record time. "I need a personal assistant. Someone who lives on site, handles my private schedule, manages household affairs. The position comes with housing, full healthcare coverage, and a salary of 200 million won annually." The number hung in the air between them. It was obscene for a personal assistant role. They both knew it. "That's..." Min-suk's voice failed. He tried again. "That's more than most executives make. Most executives aren't raising an infant alone while working night shifts and slowly poisoning themselves with black market suppressants." Min-ju kept his tone businesslike, even as Jehun grabbed his tie. "You need money. I need someone I can trust. This solves both problems. You don't know if you can trust me. I know you'd walk through fire for that baby. That's a stronger guarantee than any loyalty oath." Min-ju slid the contract across the desk. Read it. Take your time. Min Suk picked up the folder with shaking hands. Min Ju watched him read, tracking the way his eyes widened at certain clauses, the way his scent shifted from fear to confusion to something that might have been hope if hope hadn't been beaten out of him years ago. This says housing is a 3-room suite in your penthouse, Min Suk said slowly. Not staff quarters. Your actual residence. I have 12,000 square feet. Trust me, we won't be tripping over each other. And healthcare includes, Min Suk's breath caught, proper suppressants, prescription grade, and therapy. You're offering to pay for therapy? Omegas who've been through trauma need proper care. Min Ju adjusted Jehun, who was attempting to eat his cufflink. The suppressants you're using will destroy your liver within 2 years. And therapy is non-negotiable. This position requires someone stable. It was a lie. The therapy wasn't for the job. It was because Min Ju had read that file and recognized the signs of someone barely holding themselves together. But Min Suk didn't need to know that. Protection, Min Suk read aloud. You'll provide security and legal protection against any threats to my person or my son. What does that mean exactly? It means anyone who tries to hurt you or Jehun will regret it. Min Ju's scent darkened, cedar and smoke turning sharp with aggression. Including your ex-alpha if he decides he wants back in your life. Min Suk's head snapped up. How do you know about? I ran a background check. Thorough one. Min Ju met his eyes directly. I know about Choi Tae-hyun. I know what he did to you. And I know he's still in Seoul, still unmarked by consequences for abandoning his child. The color drained from Min Suk's face. You investigated me. Of course I did. I don't make business decisions blind. Min Ju kept his voice level, controlled, even as his alpha instincts raged at the fierce scent flooding the room. I needed to know what I was dealing with. What threats existed. What protection you'd need. And what else did you find? Min Suk's voice went flat, defensive. That I'm damaged goods? That I have debt I'll never clear? That my own family thinks I'm worthless? I found that you survived something that would have destroyed most people. Min Ju leaned forward, forcing Min Suk to meet his eyes. I found that you've been fighting a war alone with no weapons and no allies, and you're still standing. That's not weakness. That's strength most alphas I know don't possess. Min Suk stared at him like he'd started speaking a foreign language. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Offering me. Min Suk gestured at the contract, at Jehun, at the entire impossible situation. This. All of this. You're Kong Min Ju. You could have anyone. Why a broke Omega cleaner with a baby and enough trauma to fill a psychology textbook? Because that baby looked at me like I was worth something. Because you remind me of everything I've tried to forget about being human. Because I'm so goddamn lonely I've forgotten what it feels like to have someone need me for reasons other than fear. Because I'm a good judge of character, Min Ju said instead. And because Jehun seems to think I'm his father. Children have good instincts. His scent betrayed him. The careful control he maintained slipped for just a moment, letting something raw and possessive bleed through. Want. Need. The kind of desperate longing he'd spent 15 years suppressing. Min Suk's eyes widened, and Min Ju knew he'd caught it. Omegas were sensitive to alpha pheromones, especially in bonded ones. Min Suk would be able to read the subtext under all his careful words. This is a business arrangement, Min Ju said firmly, reining himself back in. Nothing more. You work for me, I pay you and protect you. Clean transaction. Professional boundaries. Professional, Min Suk repeated slowly, like he was testing the word. You're offering me a fortune to be your assistant, housing in your home, protection from the man who nearly killed me, and it's purely professional. Yes, and the fact that I'm an unmated Omega has nothing to do with it. No, the lie tasted like ash. I have no interest in bonding. Ever. That's in the contract, Clause 17. This arrangement is strictly employer and employee. No expectations beyond the professional. Min Suk looked down at the contract, then at Jehun happily babbling in Min Ju's arms, then back at the numbers that represented more money than he'd make in a decade at his current job. This feels like a devil's bargain, he said quietly. Maybe it is. Min Ju wouldn't insult him by pretending otherwise. But devils keep their contracts. And right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and a life of debt and fear. So the question is, are you desperate enough to take the deal? The silence stretched. Jehun broke it by reaching for Min Suk, whimpering slightly. Min Ju stood and handed the baby over, watching as Min Suk pressed his face against his son's hair and breathed deep, finding courage in the weight he carried every day. If I sign this, Min Suk said finally, and you hurt us, if this is some kind of sick game, I'll find a way to make you regret it. I don't care how powerful you are. Minju felt his mouth curve into something that might have been a smile. There's that spine. Good. I have no use for doormats. Is that a yes? That's a promise that I keep my word. Always. Minju pulled a pen from his desk and held it out. So, do we have a deal? Min-suk took the pen. His hand trembled as he signed, but his signature was clear and firm. The moment the ink dried, something shifted in the room. A transaction completed. A bond of a different kind formed. Minju signed his own name below Min-suk's and felt the weight of what he'd just done settle over him like armor. He'd brought an omega and a baby into his home, into his life. It was the exact opposite of every rule he'd lived by. And his alpha biology hummed with satisfaction, as if some fundamental piece had just clicked into place. Before I tell you what happens next, subscribe to Starry-Eyed Lovers and tell me where you're watching from. Min-suk moved into the penthouse 3 days later with everything he owned fitting into 2 suitcases and a diaper bag. Minju watched from his office doorway as his staff helped settle the Omega into the suite that hadn't been occupied in the 5 years since he'd bought the property. The rooms had been prepared, furniture, supplies, everything an Omega and infant might need. But they still felt sterile, waiting for life to fill them. Jehun had no such reservations. The baby crawled across the plush carpet with delighted squeals, exploring every corner of his new territory with the fearlessness that had gotten him into Minju's office in the first place. He likes it, Min-suk said softly, appearing beside Minju with the careful distance he'd maintained since signing the contract. I've never seen him have this much space to explore. Good. Minju tracked Jehun's progress across the room, his alpha instincts humming with satisfaction at having them here, in his territory, under his protection. He should be able to crawl without risk of falling down stairs or encountering broken locks. Min-suk flinched at the reminder. I'll be more careful. I know I failed before. Stop. Minju turned to face him fully. That wasn't a criticism. You were doing the impossible under nightmare conditions. There's a difference between failure and being set up to fail. The Omega studied him with those 2 old eyes, confusion flickering across his face. Why do you do that? Do what? Defend me. Even when I'm criticizing myself. Min-suk's voice dropped lower, mindful of the staff still moving boxes in the other room. You've been doing it since we met. Like you can't stand hearing me say negative things about myself. Because I've read your file and know exactly how much you've endured, and it makes me want to hunt down everyone who made you believe you deserved it. Because hearing you apologize for surviving makes something in my chest crack open. Because self-flagellation is counterproductive, Minju said instead. You work for me now. I need you functional, not drowning in misplaced guilt. It was a deflection and they both knew it. But Min-suk let it slide, turning his attention back to Jehun, who discovered a potted plant and was attempting to eat the leaves. No, baby, Min-suk moved quickly, scooping up his son. Not food. Plants are not food. Jehun protested loudly, reaching back for the forbidden greenery. Minju found himself smiling despite the tension, something loosening in his chest at the domestic scene. I'll have the plants moved to higher shelves, he said. Make a list of anything else that needs childproofing. You don't have to. I do if I don't want Jehun poisoning himself on my decorative flora. Minju moved into the room, deliberately invading Min-suk's space to pluck a leaf from Jehun's grip. The baby immediately grabbed his finger instead, babbling appa with conviction. Min-suk's scent shifted, something complicated mixing with the ever-present exhaustion. He keeps doing that. I don't know how to make him stop. Do you want him to stop? The question hung between them. Min-suk clutched Jehun tighter, and for a moment Minju thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly it was barely audible. No. The admission cost him. Minju could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, waiting for judgment or rejection. Instead, Minju reached out slowly, giving Min-suk time to pull away, and brushed his thumb across Jehun's chubby cheek. Good, he said simply. Because I don't want him to either. Min-suk's breath caught. Sir. Minju. When we're in private, just Minju. He pulled his hand back, putting safe distance between them again. The formality is for show. Here, in this space, we're just 2 people trying to figure out an unusual arrangement. An unusual arrangement where you're paying me a fortune and asking for what, exactly? Min-suk's voice gained an edge. Because I've read that contract a dozen times, and I still don't understand what you're getting out of this deal. This was the moment. The question Minju had been avoiding since he made the offer. He could deflect again, hide behind business logic and strategic advantage. keep his walls intact and his vulnerabilities locked down. Or he could tell the truth. He moved to the window overlooking Seoul, putting his back to Min Suk so he wouldn't have to see the Omega's reaction. The city sprawled beneath them, his empire, built on blood and calculation, and the systematic elimination of anything resembling weakness. I've forgotten what it means to be anything other than a weapon, Minju said quietly. The words felt foreign, pulled from a place he'd walled off years ago. Every decision I make is calculated. Every relationship is transactional. Every person in my life is there because they're useful or because they're too afraid to leave. He heard Min Suk shift behind him, but didn't turn around. If he looked at the Omega's face, he might lose his nerve. I built an empire on being untouchable, on needing nothing and no one. And it worked. I'm powerful beyond what most people dream of. I have wealth, influence, fear, respect, everything I was supposed to want. His hands clenched on the window frame. But when Jehun crawled into my office, do you know what I felt? What? Min Suk's voice was barely a whisper. Relief. The word came out rough, scraped raw from somewhere deep. Because for the first time in 15 years, something looked at me without fear or calculation. Just trust. Complete, stupid trust that I was safe. That I was good. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I felt like anything other than a monster people tolerate because they're terrified of what happens if they don't. The silence stretched. Minju forced himself to continue. His voice cracked and he hated himself for it. I need to remember I'm still capable of something besides destruction. That there's something in me that can still be gentle. That can still protect instead of just eliminate threats. And when I hold Jehun, when he calls me Appa like it's the most natural thing in the world, I remember. For just a moment, I remember what it felt like before I became this. Before you became what? Min Suk asked softly. Alone. The word fell between them like a stone. So achingly alone that I'd convinced myself I preferred it. He finally turned around. Min Suk stood frozen, Jehun still in his arms, staring at Minju like he was seeing him for the first time. The fear scent had faded, replaced by something Minju couldn't identify. That's what I'm getting out of this arrangement, Minju said, forcing his voice back to something approaching normal. The chance to pretend, even briefly, that I'm something other than the monster soul made me. And before you say it, yes, I know how pathetic that sounds. Yes, I know I'm using an infant's innocence as therapy. And yes, I know that makes me exactly as broken as my reputation suggests. No, Min Suk said. His voice was stronger now, certain. It makes you human. Minju laughed, the sound bitter. I'm not sure I qualify for that designation anymore. You do. Min Suk took a step closer, Jehun watching them both with solemn eyes. You really do. Because monsters don't care that they're monsters. They don't lie awake wondering if there's anything left worth saving. How do you know I lie awake? Because I do too. Min Suk's eyes held his, unflinching. I lie awake wondering if I'm broken beyond repair. If everything that happened destroyed something fundamental that I'll never get back. If Jehun deserves better than a father who jumps at shadows and can't trust anyone. Understanding passed between them. The recognition of two people who'd been shattered and were somehow still standing. So maybe, Min Suk continued quietly, we're both using each other. You need to remember you can be gentle. I need to remember I can be safe. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's not a devil's bargain. Maybe it's just two broken people trying to find something that feels like home. Jehun chose that moment to reach for Minju again, and this time Min Suk let him go. Minju caught the baby automatically, settling that familiar weight against his chest, and felt something in him ease. A transaction of damaged souls, he murmured. The most honest kind, Min Suk agreed. And for the first time since they'd met, his smile reached his eyes. The conference room fell silent when Minju entered with a baby strapped to his chest. 12 men in expensive suits froze mid-conversation, staring at Seoul's most dangerous alpha wearing a tactical baby carrier like it was body armor. Jehun slept peacefully against Minju's chest, his small body rising and falling with each breath, completely oblivious to the predators surrounding him. Park Sang-woo, head of the Dong Demon faction, was the first to recover. Kang SSI, this is unexpected. My personal assistant had an emergency, Minju said calmly, moving to his seat at the head of the table with the same commanding presence he always carried. The baby carrier didn't diminish it. If anything, the contrast made him more dangerous. We're here to discuss territorial agreements, not my childcare arrangements. Shall we begin? His own lieutenants filed in behind him, their faces carefully neutral. Only Kim Jae-sung, his right hand for a decade, allowed a flicker of something that might have been approval to cross his features before settling into his usual professional mask. Of course, Park said, but his eyes kept drifting to Jehun with poorly concealed contempt. Though perhaps we should reschedule if you're distracted. I'm not distracted. I'm multitasking. Min-ju opened his tablet with one hand, the other instinctively supporting Jehun's back. You wanted to renegotiate shipping routes through Incheon. I'm willing to discuss a compromise, but my terms are non-negotiable. The meeting progressed with the usual posturing and veiled threats that characterized Mafia negotiations. Min-ju participated with his characteristic precision, laying out logistics and profit margins while Jehun slept on, the baby's presence somehow making the brutal business discussions even more surreal. Your offer is insulting, Choi Min-suk from the Gangnam Syndicate said 40 minutes in, his alpha scent turning aggressive. You're asking for 60% of port access while we absorb all the risk. That's not negotiation, it's extortion. It's market value for the protection my organization provides, Min-ju countered evenly. Unless you'd prefer to handle territorial disputes with the Yakuza on your own? I'm sure they'd love to renegotiate your current arrangements. Jehun stirred at the sharp tone, making a small sound of distress. Min-ju's hand moved immediately to pat the baby's back in soothing circles, the gesture automatic and unconscious. Several of the rival clan members exchanged glances. Min-ju caught every one. Something funny? He asked, voice dropping to the dangerous quiet that preceded violence. Not funny, Park said carefully. Just surprising. Kong Min-ju, the ghost of Seoul, playing nursemaid during business negotiations. It's an image adjustment. My priorities have expanded, Min-ju said flatly. That doesn't make me weak. It makes me someone with more to protect. Which, if you understand basic predator behavior, makes me significantly more dangerous. Or it gives you a vulnerability, Choi suggested, his eyes fixed on Jehun with an intensity that made Min-ju's alpha instincts flare protective. Something to leverage in future disagreements. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Min-ju's lieutenants went still, hands moving subtly toward weapons. Kim Jae-sung's fingers tapped once against the table, their signal for threat assessed, waiting for orders. Let me be extremely clear, Min-ju said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority even as he continued patting Jehun's back. Anyone who mistakes my willingness to care for a child as weakness will learn exactly how that mistake ends. And I assure you, the lesson is taught only once. His eyes flashed gold, a deliberate display of alpha dominance that had nothing to do with posturing and everything to do with deadly promise. This baby is under my protection. That means he's as untouchable as I am. More so, actually, because threatening him doesn't just make an enemy of me. It makes an enemy of everyone who understands that some lines exist even in our world. We meant no disrespect, Park said quickly, reading the room's shift toward imminent violence. Choi SSI was simply making an observation. An observation that's been noted and will be remembered. Min-ju's hand never stopped its soothing motion on Jehun's back. Now, do we have an agreement on the shipping routes? Or do I need to remind you why I control those territories in the first place? The negotiations continued, but the power dynamic had shifted. Everyone in the room now understood that Min-ju wasn't softening. He was evolving. Becoming something more complex and therefore more unpredictable than the cold, untouchable ghost they'd dealt with before. An hour later, as details were being finalized, Jehun woke up fully and began to fuss. Min-ju felt the baby's distress through the carrier, the way Jehun squirmed and whimpered with increasing volume. Hungry, Min-ju said, checking his watch. Right on schedule. Kim SSI, finish the documentation. I'll review and sign tomorrow. Sir, we're in the middle of. One of his younger lieutenants started. The baby is hungry. Min-ju stood, gathering his tablet with practiced ease while supporting Jehun with his other arm. The Hansong deal can wait 30 minutes for him to eat. Everything else is already decided. He walked out of the conference room without looking back, leaving a room full of stunned mafia bosses and his own people scrambling to maintain professional composure. Kim Jae-sung found him in his private office 20 minutes later, watching Min-suk feed Jehun a bottle with the focused attention of someone who'd never been trusted with something this precious before. The rival factions think you've gone soft, Kim said without preamble. They're already planning to test your resolve. Let them. Min-ju didn't look away from Jehun's contented feeding. They'll learn the same lesson everyone else has, that underestimating me is fatal. And if they target the Omega? The child? Then I'll remind Seoul why I'm called the ghost. Min-ju's voice went cold. Because ghosts don't leave bodies to find. Kim studied him for a long moment. You've changed. Yes. Is that a problem? No. Kim's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You've spent 15 years becoming a perfect weapon. Maybe it's time you remembered how to be a person too. Minju finally looked up, meeting his oldest friend's eyes. And if being a person makes me weak? It won't. Kim gestured toward where Min Suk sat cradling Jehun, the picture of domestic peace in Minju's world of violence. Because now you have something worth fighting for beyond territory and revenge. That's not weakness. That's the difference between surviving and actually living. When did you become philosophical? When I watched my boss walk out of a critical negotiation because a baby needed lunch. Kim smiled slightly and realized that was the most alpha thing you've done in years. After Kim left, Minju stood at the window watching Seoul's skyline. Behind him, Jehun babbled contentedly and Min Suk murmured soft responses. The sounds filled his office with something that felt dangerously close to what normal families might experience. His enemies thought this was weakness. They were already plotting, already seeing opportunities in what they perceived as his softening edges. They were wrong. Minju had built an empire by being untouchable, by needing nothing. But now he had everything to lose, which meant he had no limits on what he'd do to protect it. That didn't make him weaker. It made him absolutely fucking terrifying. And Seoul was about to learn the difference. Before I tell you what happens next, subscribe to Starry-Eyed Lovers, and tell me where you're watching from. Minju knew something was wrong the moment he woke at 3 a.m. with his skin on fire. Rut. Impossible. He'd had his cycle suppressed with military-grade medications for years, controlled down to the day. This shouldn't be happening for another 3 months. But his body didn't care about schedules. It screamed alpha, mate, claim with a primal urgency that made rational thought nearly impossible. Min Suk. The scent was everywhere, saturating his penthouse, burrowing into his hindbrain. Sweet Omega, distressed Omega, his Omega. No, not his. Professional arrangement. Employee. He forced himself upright, sweat already soaking through his shirt, and tried to think past the biology howling in his veins. A crash from Min Suk's suite snapped him to his feet. He was moving before conscious thought engaged, his alpha instincts overriding everything else. The door was locked, but he had the override code, fingers fumbling with the keypad as another sound filtered through, crying. Not Jehun's usual fussy protests, but deep, painful wails that made Minju's chest constrict. The suite was chaos. Min Suk knelt on the floor in pajamas, Jehun clutched against his chest, both of them radiating distress. The baby was burning up, his small face flushed and tear-streaked. And Min Suk sent. Suppressants failed. Min Suk gasped, looking up with eyes blown wide with panic and the beginning of heat. I don't know when, they were supposed to last another week, but Jehun's sick, and I can't think straight and. How long has he had the fever? Minju forced his voice steady despite every instinct screaming to grab them both, to protect, to claim. 2 hours. It won't go down. I've tried everything, but he just keeps getting worse and I can't take him to the hospital like this. Min Suk's words tumbled over each other, coherence fracturing under the dual assault of heat and terror. They'll smell the heat on me and ask questions, and if Taehyun finds out. He won't. Minju crouched down, bringing himself to their level even as his rut brain roared at the proximity. Let me see him. Min Suk hesitated only a second before passing Jehun over. The baby was listless, his usual babbling replaced by weak whimpers. Minju pressed a hand to the small forehead and felt the dangerous heat radiating from that tiny body. Hospital, he said flatly. Now, I'll have Kim arrange private transport and buy out the pediatric floor. No one will question anything. You're in rut. Min Suk's voice cracked. I can smell it. You can barely. I can function. Minju pulled out his phone, calling Kim while cradling Jehun with his other arm. The baby curled into his chest instinctively, seeking alpha comfort. Get the car ready. Private entrance to Seoul National. Buy out whoever you need to. We're bringing in a sick infant and an Omega in preheat, and I want 0 security risks. Sir, if you're both compromised, then improvise. Move. The next 3 hours blurred into a nightmare of white hospital walls and Jehun's weak crying. Viral infection, the doctors said. Treatable but requiring monitoring. They admitted him with the kind of swift efficiency that only unlimited money and Minju's reputation could buy. Min Suk refused to leave Jehun's side despite his heat escalating. Minju watched the Omega's control fracture in real time. The way he swayed, the slick starting to soak through his clothes, the desperate whimpers he tried to suppress every time someone came too close. You need to go to a heat room, Minju said for the fourth time, his own rut making every word feel like swallowing glass. They have facilities here. Private, secure. No. Min Suk's voice was steel-wrapped in silk. I'm not leaving my son. You're going into full heat in a hospital room. Then leave. Min Suk met his eyes, his own gold-rimmed and defiant. You don't have to stay. I know what I'm asking, what this is doing to you. But I can't leave him. I won't. Minju should have left. Should have removed himself from the situation before his control snapped entirely and he did something unforgivable. Instead, he found himself settling into the chair beside Min Suk's. Close enough to offer support, but far enough that they weren't touching. I'm not going anywhere, he heard himself say. They sat vigil together as dawn broke. Min Suk's heat crashed over him in waves, and Minju's rut responded with increasing aggression. But neither moved. They took turns holding Jehun when he fussed, passing the baby back and forth with careful hands that never quite touched. Min Suk fetched water. Minju adjusted blankets. The professional distance they'd maintained so carefully shattered under the weight of shared terror and their body's betrayal. I'm sorry, Min Suk whispered during hour 5, when Jehun had finally fallen into restless sleep and they were alone except for the monitors. I know this is. My heat must be making your rut worse. It's not your fault. Minju's knuckles were white where he gripped the chair arm, the only thing keeping him from reaching out. Biology doesn't ask permission. Still, you're being so gentle. Even now, Min Suk's laugh cracked. I thought alphas in rut were supposed to be monsters. Most of us are. Minju forced himself to look at the wall instead of the beautiful, vulnerable Omega beside him. I've just had a lot of practice controlling the monster. Min Suk was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly Minju almost missed it. Maybe I don't want you to control it. Not with me. Minju's head snapped around. Min Suk was looking at him with heat-bright eyes, and underneath the pheromones and desperation was something that looked dangerously like want. You don't mean that. It's the heat talking. It's me talking. Min Suk reached out, his hand trembling, and brushed his fingers against Minju's. The contact sent electricity through them both. I've been broken for so long I forgot what it felt like to want something. But I want. His phone shattered the moment. Kim's voice came through sharp with urgency. Sir, we have a situation. Multiple breaches at the penthouse. Coordinated attack. And someone claiming to have Jehun's medical records is demanding. Jehun is here. Minju cut him off. With me. Then who the hell did they take? The bottom dropped out of Minju's world. He was on his feet, Jehun in his arms before his brain caught up. What do you mean take? They have something. Someone. They're claiming it's leverage. Choi Tae-hyun is leading the assault. Kim's voice went hard. And he's asking for the Omega and the baby in exchange for, Sir, they have CCTV from the hospital. They know you're all there. Min Suk's fear scent exploded through the room. No. No, he can't. The hospital room door burst open. Not doctors this time. Men in tactical gear with weapons and expressions that promised violence. And behind them, wearing a smile that made Minju's vision pulse red, stood Choi Tae-hyun. Hello, Min Suk, the alpha said pleasantly. I believe we have some unfinished business. Minju's rut brain and rational mind aligned for the first time in his life, both screaming the same thing, destroy. He moved before Choi Tae-hyun's smile finished forming, passing Jehun to Min Suk with one hand while the other pulled the gun from the holster concealed under his jacket. The tactical team barely had time to raise their weapons before Minju put 3 bullets through the kneecaps of the men closest to the door. Get behind me, he ordered Min Suk, his voice dropping to the alpha command that compelled obedience on a biological level. Now, Min Suk scrambled backward with Jehun, pressing himself against the far wall as chaos erupted. Hospital alarms shrieked. Minju's own security flooded the hallway behind Choi's men. The hospital room transformed into a war zone in seconds. But Minju's focus never wavered from the alpha who dared threaten what was his. Impressive response time, Choi said, seeming unconcerned by the violence exploding around him. But you're outnumbered and in rut. Not exactly peak negotiating condition. I'm not negotiating. Minju fired again, this time taking out the window behind Choi in a spray of glass. I'm removing a problem. Choi's smile faltered. You'd start a gang war over a used Omega and a bastard child? That's not the Kong Minju I've heard about. Where's the legendary restraint? The cold calculation. You're looking at what happens when calculation meets protection instinct. Minju stalked forward, gun steady despite the rut screaming in his veins. And you made a critical miscalculation thinking I'd let you walk out of here breathing. Kill me and the rival factions will. The rival factions can join you in hell. Minju's eyes flashed pure gold. You came into my territory, threatened my Omega, endangered a child under my protection. Pack law is very clear about the appropriate response. Your Omega? Choi laughed, the sound sharp with disbelief. He's not bonded. He's just another. Mine, Minju snarled, the alpha command reverberating through the room with physical force. And I'm claiming him. Right here, right now, with all of you as witnesses. The room went silent. Even the fighting in the hallway paused as the weight of what he'd just declared settled over everyone present. No, Choi said, understanding dawning with horror. You can't. A formal claim requires nothing except intent and the Omega's consent. Minju kept his weapon trained on Choi, but turned his head slightly toward Min Suk. And he has every legal right to accept protection from an alpha who actually wants him. Minju. Min Suk's voice trembled but held steady. If you do this, if you claim me, you can't undo it. The bond is permanent. I know. You said you'd never bond. That attachment was. I lied. The admission came easier than it should have. To you. To myself. Because admitting I wanted you, wanted this, meant accepting I wasn't as in control as I thought. Minju's gun never wavered from Choi even as he spoke. So I'm asking, will you accept my claim? Let me be the alpha you and Jehun deserve. The heat had Min Suk sent wild, his defenses shattered, but his eyes were clear when he met Minju's gaze. Yes. The word hung in the air for a heartbeat. Then Minju moved with the speed that had made him Seoul's most dangerous alpha, crossing the space between them in 2 strides. He pulled Min Suk into his arms, careful of Jehun still clutched between them, and sank his teeth into the traditional claiming spot where neck met shoulder. The bond snapped into place like a circuit completing. Minju felt it burn through his entire system. Min Suk's fear and hope and desperate trust flooding into him alongside the heat and exhaustion. And flowing back, his own fierce protectiveness, the possessive pride, the determination that nothing would ever hurt them again. Min Suk gasped, his free hand clutching at Minju's shirt as the bond settled into place. I can feel. Oh God, I can feel you. I know. Minju pressed his forehead against Min Suk's, breathing him in. I've got you. Both of you. Always. This is insane, Choi spat. You've destroyed your reputation over a... I've clarified my priorities. Minju turned, putting himself between Choi and his newly claimed mate. The bond hummed with satisfaction at the protective positioning, and made it very clear what happens to anyone who threatens them. Now get the fuck out of my sight before I decide permanent removal is worth the paperwork. Kim appeared in the doorway, flanked by Minju's full security detail. Sir? Orders. Escort Choi Taehyun off the premises. If he's still in Seoul by sunrise, put a bounty on his head large enough that every mercenary in Asia comes hunting. Minju's voice carried absolute authority. And send word to all the syndicates. Anyone who touches my mate or my son answers to me personally. Your son? Choi's face twisted. That bastard isn't. Minju fired. The bullet passed close enough to Choi's ear that he felt the heat. The next one goes through your skull. Leave. Now. They dragged Choi out, still protesting, still not understanding that he'd already lost the moment he'd stepped into Minju's territory. The hospital staff fled to give them privacy. The alarms cut off, leaving only the monitors beeping steadily as Jehun slept on, exhausted but safe. He'll come back, Min Suk whispered against Minju's chest. Or send others. The claim makes me legally yours, but nothing. Minju pulled back enough to look at his mate properly. I'm filing adoption papers for Jehun tomorrow. Full legal rights. And restructuring my organization to ensure you're both protected even if something happens to me. Nothing's going to happen to you. Probably not. But I've spent 15 years operating like I had nothing to lose. Minju brushed his thumb across Min Suk's claiming mark, feeling the bond pulse with shared sensation. Now I have everything. That changes the calculation. How? It makes me more dangerous, not less. Minju smiled, and it wasn't the cold slash he'd worn for years, but something genuine. Because I'm not fighting for territory or revenge anymore. I'm fighting for family. And there's no limit to what I'll do to protect that. 3 months later, Minju stood in his office watching the sun set over Seoul. The city sprawled beneath him, his empire intact and stronger than before. Turned out that having a mate and child hadn't made him weak. It had made him terrifying in ways his enemies hadn't anticipated. An alpha with nothing to lose was dangerous. An alpha with everything to protect was unstoppable. Behind him, Jehun babbled from his playpen while Min Suk worked at the desk they'd moved in, managing the legitimate business front that was slowly overtaking the criminal operations. They were transforming together, the empire, the family, everything. Appa! Jehun's voice rang out, clear and delighted. Min-ju turned to find his son. Legally, officially his son now, standing unsteadily on chubby legs, arms outstretched. The first steps. Min-ju crossed the room in seconds, scooping Jehun up as the baby laughed. Did you see that? Min-suk's eyes shone. He walked. I saw. Min-ju pressed his face against Jehun's soft hair, breathing in the scent of his son. Very brave. Just like your Amma. Min-suk came to stand beside them, and Min-ju pulled him close with his free arm. They fit together perfectly now. The bond had settled into something comfortable and right. His mate, his son, his family. 15 years ago, Min-ju had sworn he needed nothing and no one. That attachment was death and love was weakness. He'd been wrong. This, Min-suk's warmth against his side, Jehun's babbling joy, the sense of being part of something larger than his own survival. This wasn't weakness. This was everything. And Min-ju would burn soul to ashes before he let anyone take it from him. Home, Jehun said clearly, patting Min-ju's chest. Home, Appa. Yes, Min-ju agreed, looking at the two people who'd crawled into his fortress and his heart. We're home.